total likely write-downs on US originated debt alone is one.
So Zanny, is next year going to be any better? Is the end in sight, do you think?
Well, I think it depends a bit on what you're talking about. I think we may be closer to the beginning of the end of the financial disruptions, but I think next year is going to be extremely grim from the perspective of the real economy. We've entered what is going to be a very nasty recession. It's going to be the most synchronized recession in the rich world since the 1930s. And even more worryingly, the emerging economies, which we thought were going to cushion us from this, seem to be slowing rapidly too. So I think the real economy is going to be tough. How tough depends really on policy responses. And the good news is that I think policymakers around the world recognize the gravity of the situation and are determined to really do what it takes to stop the world's economies falling off a cliff. And I think the biggest reason for hope is actually the US right now, where President-elect Obama has really let it be known that he sees the gravity of the situation and is going to jolt the economy, to use his words. He said the economy needed a blood transfusion, it needed a jolt. There's going to be a very big fiscal stimulus in the US. People are talking about $500 to $700 billion. There's going to be, Obama talks about the biggest infrastructure spending since the early 1950s when America built the interstate highway system. You know, I'm somewhat, there are problems with that. I'm somewhat skeptical about how quickly you can do infrastructure spending, but I think they'll send money to the states, there'll be tax cuts. We will debate for months as to how effective this is, but I think what is clear is that the new administration is determined to kind of act boldly to counter this. They're also a very experienced, pretty creative team. Tim Geithner, the new Treasury Secretary, is currently president of the New York Fed. He's been closely involved in this crisis. Larry Summers, who is going to be the sort of coordinator of economic policy in the White House, is possibly the most kind of creative economist of our time. He's someone of whom Henry Kissinger famously said, every president should have an office for Larry Summers in the White House. Well, he's got an office in the White House now. So I think you've got a pretty good team. They're centrist, they're creative, but it's tough. And it's, we're unwinding. We're in the hangover from the biggest asset bubble ever. And it's a long and nasty hangover. We're going to need to do more to recapitalize banks. We're going to need to do more to help homeowners. We're going to need fiscal stimulus. We're going to need more from monetary policy. The Fed has been kind of at the forefront of being creative. As you know, the US has basically got short-term interest rates pretty close to zero. But they've already started what's called quantitative easing. They're essentially printing money to bypass sclerotic credit markets. I suspect other countries are going to go down that route. My worry, I guess I have two big worries. One is whether China is going to do as much of a stimulus as it needs to and as it has room to do. You know, it's got huge reserves, it's got ample room to stimulate its economy. Its economy is slowing very dramatically. It's talked about a very big stimulus, 14% of GDP. Whether that actually happens and how big it is very important. And also whether it's focused on getting the Chinese to spend more rather than just on infrastructure spending. Slightly worrying concerns I have are that the Chinese are still very keen to subsidize their exporters. And I'm concerned that they don't understand that it's extremely important for the global economy, as well as their own, to shift the composition of growth. And the other area to worry about is Europe, particularly Germany. You know, Germans don't really believe in fiscal stimulus, and they believe in prudence at all times. And I think we're now in an era where the Keynesian response is the right one, and I think it's important for a creditor country like Germany also to do that. But on the assumption that politicians really are determined not to repeat the mistakes of the 1930s and to recognize that their actions are really going to help determine how much we can cushion this downturn, then I'm guardedly optimistic, put it that way, that things will start getting better in 2010. I think 09 is going to be really grim, certainly in the real economy, but we know how to stop this, we know how to cushion it. We're still going to have a nasty downturn, and we're still going to have, and I think this is something that isn't that widely recognized, it's going to be a slow recovery. It is a very nasty downturn, but we're not all suddenly going to bounce back straight away. This is a hangover from a very, very, very big asset bust, and hangovers take a long time to work off.